Good morning. I've been here about 10 and a half months, and it seems like just yesterday I started a little company called Salute in January 2013 that was focused on bringing veterans into the data center industry. And with Memorial Day being this weekend, I wanted to give you a little plug about what we're doing at Uptime about that. The network group invited me to speak in April, and I came down and spoke with them in Charlotte about what we were doing, and they got excited about it. The Uptime management talked to me and said, would I come on board at Uptime and help do this at an industry level? So I jumped at the opportunity because of the impact it can have, both on veterans, getting them back into the job force, but also on the really critical personnel shortage we have in our industry. So I started working with the network group. We got a subcommittee together and we tried to find out what we could do that was not duplicative out there already being done for veterans. And the thing we decided was we need to raise visibility of our industry because a lot of people don't know that the data center industry exists and the opportunities there and the growth that's happening. And the way to do that was to tap into the DoD. There's transition assistance programs that they have, and if you tap into the right systems, you can hit every branch of the military so that any job posted on the Uptime site gets automatically posted to the transition assistance systems. Every veteran coming off of active duty, or reserve that's been deployed will see the jobs. So we've asked that people go out and post their jobs, and they'll be able to get veterans into their workforce, whether it's as a trainee or those that have experienced technical training in the military. We've already got 20 companies that are signed up on this and posting jobs. We're getting applicants right now, so it's taking off, and we think that this is going to be good for the industry in general. And if you look around the room and you think about the number of veterans already in this industry, you know that the discipline and rigor that they learn in the military translates well to the data center environment. So basically, we're asking that get with your HR departments if you believe in the value of veterans in the enterprise, whether it's doing a service back to those who have served us, or just realizing it's good business, like John mentioned at dinner last night, to get this workforce up with people that have the discipline and skills to be able to bring to the data center industry. And get your suppliers. That's the other key thing, because all of us have 10 to 20 suppliers with every data center. Get them posting jobs too. It's a great technical training entry point to the data center industry, and see what happens. And I wanted to thank those who have already signed up, because it's only been up a month and we're already seeing activity and benefits from it. Now on with the program. So start with the end in mind as a concept where we were looking at the successes of data centers across the world, and those that were able to come up in day one, start with operations and start deploying technology were the ones that we considered the most successful. They come in on budget, on time, and they're able to deploy technology, because an asset that's sitting dormant and empty is a wasted asset. The biggest benefit that the clients that we talk to derive from this is uptime, of course, but the biggest is return on investment. Whatever your cost of capital is, when you sink that into the data center and you bring it up day one, the longer you wait to deploy technology, the more you have to make up that year. Because that first year, you're going to have to get a return on the investment, and the only way to do that is get technology into the data center. So we're encouraging everybody to look at the concept of getting operations in from the beginning. I think the concept of design, build, operate, just the term has been misleading because people think it's linear. You design it, you build it, you operate it, but it's actually one continuous process from an operations point of view. Whether you're building new or you're going through a retrofit or an expansion, you need to have your operators involved from the beginning. They look at the change management, they'll get the change management procedures in place. They'll make sure that value engineering doesn't happen in isolation, because the operator is going to look at any value engineering as what it's going to cost over the next 20 years, not what it's going to cost just to get to substantial completion. And the characteristics we saw in these data centers that we surveyed was that not only did they get their operations involved from the beginning, but they ran their operations like high-performance teams. They got the EOPs in place, they ran them through the EOPs, got them involved with their commissioning teams, and then ran the drills on a continuous basis so that that operations team, when there is an event, can step in and make that event have as small an instant time frame as possible. As we were looking at this, there was one other missing ingredient, and we started finding out that the key to being able to implement any program is how you buy it. So if you change how you buy it and you start putting into your RFP the requirements for having operations sign off on the design, getting the operations program developed while the construction program is being developed, and actually procure what you want. It'll go from, at the bidders conference, everybody saying yes and putting it in their PowerPoint, to actually being in the contract and being delivered. So the concept is normal construction timeline: planning, design, construction, commissioning, and turnover. And whether you're a tiered data center or a non-tiered data center, this concept works. You need to have your senior staff involved from the very beginning and planning. They'll get with the clients, they'll understand what the service levels are. That'll translate into staffing requirements, vendor requirements, start getting the RFPs together and start getting the staffing requests together to be able to build that operations team during the planning phase. And during the operations planning phase and the design that runs concurrent to that, you get them in on the design review and you get them start planning what they need to do for shift schedules, get the MMS systems, the BMS systems identified and acquired. Then you move into the construction cycle. While you're doing construction of the building's going up, so does the operation program. You've got to write the procedures. There's going to be a lot of procedures to get in place. There's going to be a lot of systems to get in place. And this is the time frame where you can get all of that implemented and solid before you move into the testing phase, because commissioning cannot be seen as something that you just do to the equipment. You've got to test out your procedures, and there's going to be no other time in the life of that data center where you'll have the capacity to run through all of your EOPs, to get the staff totally conversant in those systems. This is the time when you should be getting your operations team involved with your commissioning cycles and everything. And then you turn it over into production and you burn in those procedures. What we've seen more often than not is they get 90% there. The next year we'll work out the interdepartmental steps between IT, facilities, security, and make sure that the kinks are worked out, instant management reporting is working, and that everything rolls from there. So bottom line, what we're pitching is operations in from the beginning. There are benefits to it, and that's why we asked Joe Kava to come up today and talk with us about what they're doing at Google, because it's not a new concept. A lot of companies have been doing this. We would just like to institutionalize it and get it out into the industry so that people can benefit from it. It's kind of hard to introduce somebody like Joe. He's the VP of Data Centers at Google, if you don't know him, but he speaks at a lot of conferences, has a ton of experience, and a proven track record for deploying technology quickly, and with that having the balanced attack of getting operations in early. And I'd like to welcome him to the stage, and we'll have a conversation about the concept that we've been talking about. Mr. Joe Kava.
Thanks very much, Lee.
Which chair?
Okay.
So I've given my pitch on start with the end in mind.
Yeah.
I'd like to find out what Google's been doing and how you apply this.
Okay. So we've been working on this this data center program of ours for over a decade now, and operations were considered to be core to our success from the beginning. So we decided that we weren't going to follow a traditional model, which might be that you hire your design consultants. You go through the design charades, you get into your planning and construction, and then your commissioning, maybe you bring in a commissioning agent and have them test out the facility, and then eventually you get to a point where the GC and architects and engineers turn over a stack of documentation to the operations team, kind of hand them the keys and say, good luck. So we started with the idea, very much the way you've got it mapped out here. We bring our operations onto the project at about T minus 6 months, and T being the time that the MEP equipment is installed. That doesn't mean that it's commissioned, that doesn't mean it's tested, that doesn't mean final handover, doesn't mean when your clusters are turned up. That's when the MEP equipment is installed. So that's about roughly 3 to 6 months before the facility actually goes live. So we bring them on 6 months before that so that they're there throughout the entire installation of all the MEP equipment. They're there throughout the testing. We lead the commissioning from our operations team ourselves with commissioning partners, but we write all the test scripts. The operations group, during that T-minus time, they're writing all the MOPs and the SOPs, the emergency operating plans, the commissioning test scripts. They're working side by side with the different trades, because oftentimes, you know, it's human nature that if you make a mistake, you tend to maybe cover it up. We want those mistakes exposed. So our guys are there in the field with the construction teams, working side by side, looking at all the, you know, where are all the skeletons in the closet going to be, so to speak.
Awesome.
So we know going in what we can expect. And then, you know, there really is no better time than commissioning to really wring it out. Yeah. And hopefully you never get another chance once you're in operations to make those types of tests. So it starts from the beginning, but we've even backed it up now where our operations team, we've got a small group of them that are dedicated to the design. So when we're doing our design charades, and each data center starts with kind of a basis of design that might be roughly 60 to 80% already done from our past data centers, but every data center is you know, customized, optimized for that location, for the environment and whatnot, and operations are at the table during all of those design charades, because I think you were mentioning about you have to have that kind of TCO analysis. You can make trade-offs in design, installation, and operations, but without the perspective of what this is going to cost in the long term to continue to operate that way, you might be making mistakes. So that's why they're at the table during the design phase now as well. Absolutely.
How did you get senior management to approve this? Everybody's always pushing back saying the cost of bringing people in early.
Yeah. So first of all, you have to look at, you know, where's the majority of your expense in a data center project, and it's really in your MEP installation and your equipment, right? Excluding the IT side, but you know, from the physical facilities perspective. So why would you not be taking care of that equipment from day one and making sure that you're prepared to maintain it, operate it, you know, do any break fix that occurs. And so it really just became a cost-benefit analysis. The risk of letting things go and doing it poorly was too much of a detriment to not have the benefit of having the guys involved up front. And it's a little bit more money, sure, because you have staff on board for roughly 6 months, maybe before you might otherwise. But it was a pretty simple decision in the end for us. Just, you know, you just look at the cost benefit, and then also it does help that all operations, engineering, construction management, and all that, they all roll up under my organization. So it was pretty easy to convince myself.
Yeah. Well, what about measures of success? We talk about early on in the project planning that aligning with the business unit, understanding what success looks like for an operations team.
Mm-hmm. So I think it starts from onboarding. Once a new technician or an engineer comes onto the program, they go through, we developed our own kind of training academy. Depending on what your job function is, you get on a different track in this training academy. And part of that is about learning our cultural value system and really what our role is in the, you know, kind of the end-to-end delivery of services, not just for our internal customers, which are like the Gmails and, you know, Google Pluses of the world, but for our external customers, all of the users around the world that use all of Google's products. And so people start to develop that mindset, and from the beginning, everyone understands what their piece of that delivery system is. So, like for instance, if there is a piece of equipment that needs to have, you know, your CMMS system spits out that you've got this particular maintenance activity on that, all the guys have targeted response times and SLAs around getting that done and closed out and that ticket, you know, completed. So we've kind of developed the mentality that even on the operations side, it's SLA based. Same thing, if you know, Gmail says, you know, we're seeing a problem with these servers, our hardware operations techs have SLAs that they have to meet in terms of response time for repairing, upgrading, or replacing the servers and storage systems as well. So you just build it in from the beginning, that mindset that, this is a business. We consider it a manufacturing business. Our manufacturing happens to be that we produce data, or we produce data processing systems. Well, you have to treat it like a manufacturing environment. If something is broken or needs to be upgraded or retrofit, you have to hold yourself accountable to a certain, performance standard. And so you create metrics, and then in our business, we've aligned, like 6 or almost 7 now major KPIs, and under that, there's about 42 metrics that all roll up to that, and everyone can map. With my job, I'm accountable for these 4 metrics, or these 8, or these 6. Everyone knows what they are, and it's reported on a quarterly basis. So we kind of keep track of how we're doing and see where we need to do better.
Incentives and promotions are aligned?
Yep, absolutely. And then the other thing is that this was kind of a carryover from the military. Like many of you, I suspect that a lot of our operations folks were, previously from the military. And so you're familiar with the operations, the OQS, Operations Qualification Standards?
Yeah.
Well, we have that also. So if you want to progress through your career and up to, plant engineer or something like that, there's different OQS levels that you have to pass and be certified to. And it was easy for the guys to understand and adopt, because many of them grew up with that from the military. And it's also a great way to keep them learning and keep them developing, and the team can look and say, yeah, that's what I want to do with my career. I have a path that I know I have to follow to get there.
Drills. Do your guys run through the emergency drills? You've got a lot of military guys on staff.
Yep. Yes. We actually, as a company, not just in the data centers, but in the company, we are kind of obsessed with testing, because you really never know, and you can do it on paper all you want, but until you actually do it, you never know how things are going to work or how people are going to respond. So we do everything from, usually once a year we have our disaster recovery testing program, and the team that is responsible for planning that, they'll go and develop a handful of scenarios. One of them may be that, there was a major earthquake in California and headquarters over here is completely knocked offline. And so then they'll work with the network team, and during that week of testing, the network team will logically isolate Mountain View from everywhere else. And then the teams have to figure out how to get things done to make sure the business keeps running. Like simple things like getting POs opened and processed, right? All those systems are, reside on the CorpNet in headquarters here. So we've built, of course, all the backup systems and the redundancy, but they have to be exercised. So we literally will logically isolate Mountain View. None of us are allowed to respond to any emails or phone calls or anything, and the teams have to demonstrate that our emergency procedures are working properly, and if not, let's figure out what has to be changed or modified. We'll do, we'll often do mini pull-the-plug tests in the data centers to make sure that all the backup systems are working properly. So you have to exercise the equipment, but you do that under a planned, a planned window, so that our services are designed in such a way that they can, they're multi-home, so that they can be serving from many different data centers. So if we're going to test this data center or this zone or this cluster in the data center, we inform all of the service owners that have services in there, and they will move traffic away so that minimize the risk. But then we can actually go ahead and do up to including pull-the-plug tests.
Wow. Includes the vendors in those drills?
Usually we do, yeah. Of course, you want to have your, like if you're going to do a pull-the-plug test, you kind of want your generator vendors standing by just in case, right? So yes, we do include the vendors, but all the organization, the design of those drills, all of that is done by our own teams.
We got a common theme in a lot of the surveys is that you get what you pay for and you get what you put in the RFP. To implement this, did you do anything different in the RFPs with making requirements that they include the operations staff and have the sign off through the design review with the vendors?
I'm trying to to think if we specifically included in the RFPs or if it was just, these are our requirements, you know, and I think that as important as contracts are, the relationship is much more important. Because ultimately, if I'm just going to turn it over to the lawyers to look at the contract and read the letter of the law and what was in there, and it's not going to be the right type of you know, mutually beneficial type relationship. So I'm more a proponent of, and I emphasize the necessity to bring your close vendors and your partners in close to you and have them understand our value system, which is probably a lot different than other customers that they're working with. And the more you can do that, then the better they're going to be able to respond and to be a good partner with you. And so I believe more in relationships than I do in contract. Contracts are necessary, but ultimately you're not going to have every specific thing. You know, you and I can sit down and we might be lucky to get 90% of all the potential things that might come up, right?
No, good point. What about vendor training? Do you put them through the same process onboarding like you do the new employees?
Yeah, so we work with the vendors to have their, we look at their own training programs. Many of them have really quite good training programs, but then we make recommendations or suggestions. A lot of it has to do with our requirements for safety training are far greater than what most of the industry averages and what they've experienced at other companies. So a lot of the vendor training has to do with specific safety protocols for the jobs that they're doing and our own construction and operations safety training program. You know, most of the people that come on, if they're a mechanic or an HVAC technician or an electrician, they're well trained. They're probably journeyman level, right? But it really gets back to how do we operate our facilities? What is our value system and our safety program, which is probably different than what they've experienced before.
And being a global company, have you had challenges trying to roll this model out on a global basis?
Little bit, yes. In certain regions, you know, there's, once again, it comes back down, I think, to the local norms, the value system, the culture of that you know, the people and the companies in that region. We probably haven't done as good of a job as we should in some new regions where we started to build. So I think that the way we've learned to get past that is to, you know, you can't necessarily change a culture, but you can influence it. And so we spend a lot more time now in the upfront interviewing phase for partners, whether it's construction or operations, to really try and dig into the value system of the principles in that company, and does it align reasonably close with us? Because chances are that if that company has a similar value system, then it's propagated down through the ranks in that company. And then we always bring a core team of our experienced operators and engineers to work on that project locally, wherever it is, so that they can help reinforce the value system and the behaviors that we're looking for. And sometimes it's tougher than others. Some, you know, I think really what it comes from is, like, in certain cultures, it's really not okay to ever question or challenge your direct manager, right? That's not our culture. In our culture, if you have a set of data that indicates we should be doing something different than what your boss told you to do, in our culture, it's totally okay and it's expected for you to speak up and say, wait a minute, this is what the data says. We should probably rethink this. But as you all know, that's not the norm in certain societies. So getting people to step out of that, and it takes a while, but then it is pretty interesting watching them. They almost, like, you can see them growing, and that's pretty rewarding too.
Yeah. Well, you talked about operations reviewing the design and being in early from that point. What about the turnover part? Is there a structured way that the data center manager accepts rather than just being given the data center?
Yeah, absolutely. In our case, the data center managers, and there's two of them, because we have the hardware operations technicians and that team, which is responsible for basically all the IT, and the facilities team, and they work as kind of a co-partner. So they are the management team for the site. They both are involved in the handover of the facility. They review all the outstanding items, and there's almost never a project that ends without some punch list items that still have to be, taken care of. And it would be, I think, ridiculous to assume that everything is 100%, ready, and it would be wasteful, because you can certainly start operating while you're fixing dings in the walls and things like that, right? So, but those two managers are responsible for signing off and saying, I am willing to accept this now. And if it's something that's really that important, then they'll say, no, we can't accept it until this is done. Otherwise, and then they formally accept it, and then they're responsible for making sure that the punch list items are completed by the construction and or commissioning teams.
Does size matter? Do you have to be a big company to be able to use this concept in your mind?
I don't think so. You don't even have to have your own staff. I know that a lot of people use various different companies for full operations. We have kind of a hybrid model where roughly 60-ish% of our operations team are Googlers, and 40% are from our contract operations and partners. But even if you're 100% outsourced, I think you can still use the rough model that you've outlined here. It would require a little bit different thinking, as you said. It might require a little bit more money up front, but what we've seen is that ultimately that saves in the end. I think all of us have kind of war stories where something goes wrong. It's usually the middle of the night, like on a Sunday morning at 3 in the morning or something like that. The operations team run in there and they assess what's going on. And the fact is that mistakes happen because people are unfamiliar with the normal state. And being able to sit back and assess and say, wait a minute, is the system behaving as it was designed under this scenario or not? And so how you develop that ability is making them more comfortable. And if they were involved in the construction, the installation, the writing of the scripts to test the equipment and commission it, they were doing the commissioning side by side with the commissioning agent or whatever, then they're much more comfortable with how this system is truly supposed to behave. And they're less likely to go in and, open a tiebreaker that closed when it was actually supposed to be closed, and those are the types of mistakes all of us, know. We have all these war stories, right? But I think that's where the value comes in. So you have to kind of be willing to take a little bit of a leap of faith and say, I'm going to spend money up front, a little bit more than I would, but in the end, it's gonna pay back, many-fold over.
And then you've got it in production, they've accepted it. Do you have any sort of audit process beyond the SLA reporting where you go and look at different data centers, assess how they're doing?
Yeah, that's something that we started, maybe about 4 years ago. And they're operational assessments. And so we'll get data center managers from site A and B and C, and they will go and visit the data center site D. And they have, we've developed a pretty thorough list of assessment criteria that we look. And this is a little bit tough also, right? Because at first, natural human reaction is, I don't want someone coming into my house and telling me how to do things in my house. But once you get past that, now all of the data center managers are usually asking, hey guys, when can you come and do an assessment for me? Because you realize that as good as you are and as good as your team is, you get just that, I'm living it every day. I see it every day, and you miss things. Yeah. So having teams come in, and this comes from the military also, in the nuclear Navy, I think there's the team called the Oars Board, and they come in, and their job is to kind of mess things up and watch how the teams respond, and then grade them. And so we've taken that approach, and you have to be, open and willing to accept that feedback. And we always find things, even for some of our oldest sites that are operating for long periods of time, and they're operating extremely well. teams come in and they still find things and ways we can do certain things better. So we have adopted that operational assessment model.
Okay, cool. Well, that's kind of it on questions for me. I wonder if there's any questions in the audience? I see a hand up.
Mm-hmm.
Not a question, just two comments. Number one, I couldn't agree more with what you guys say. I mean, this is one of the keys to successful operation. If we could put the previous slide back up on the screen, I would submit to you that in some jobs, the SOPs, MOPs, and EOPs have to be developed to a certain stage during design, because particularly if you've got something unusual, or if you're going to automate the operation a lot, say if a facility is not going to be continuously manned, you've got a lot of bells and whistles that have got to be provided in the gear. And if the designer doesn't understand how the equipment is going to be operated, they shouldn't be designing it. I think that I would submit to you that maybe you might want to revise that, this flow chart.
No, that's a good point. I got to get marketing involved, so that'll be a little while.
No, I totally agree. I think that without knowing what the operating procedures are going to be, you can't make a good assessment about whether I should automate that function or if I should leave it a manual function. I know I'm going to have 7x24 staff there. I know my guys are very smart, very capable, and highly trained. Should I automate it or should I let them perform that manually? I don't know how detailed is that procedure to operate that manually. So I think you're exactly right. You have to develop some of those procedures up front so you can make those good TCO decisions.
Any other questions?
Does Google have a long-term investment and return scenario for the data centers that it builds, just like other MTDC providers would? Do you look at a 10-year time frame for what you'd like to get out of a particular site? 5 years, longer?
Yeah. Well, of course, when we're developing sites, we're looking for a pretty long runway. Most of our sites are positioned such that we're not going to build a data center there. It's going to be a campus that we will expand in over time. So we're looking at a pretty long horizon. But I think if I can assume the question also relates to kind of return on investment, and do we have a target for an anticipated lifetime of the equipment in there? And that answer for Google, it really depends. I mean, I've talked a little bit that a couple of years ago we started a major retrofit program in our Oregon data center. Our Oregon data center was the first one that we built ourselves, and it had only been operating for about 6-ish years. And we pretty much gutted a lot of the electrical and cooling infrastructure in a data center that was only 6 years old and put in new generation equipment, because that new generation equipment allowed us to bring in new platforms, new server and storage technologies that completely made sense from an ROI perspective. So we could get far more computing capability out of that center. So the upgrade, while a lot of people would naturally just say, those switchboards, those are supposed to be 15 or 20-year lifetime or something like that. We can't rip them out after only 6 years. Well, it made complete sense once you look at what the benefit is you're going to get from doing that. So we don't have a set criteria that the equipment has to last X number of years. It really just depends on a case-by-case basis. Cool.
Joe?
Yeah.
On the operations staff that you bring in to man the new data center, are they typically writing those MOPs and EOPs? And if so, who approves those for you?
Yeah. They are writing them. We have also tech writers that sit with each of the teams, because many of the engineers and technicians that we hire are really experts in operating and maintaining the equipment. They oftentimes are not excellent writers. And so we put tech writing staff with them, embedded in the teams there. The tech writers get the formatting correct, make sure that a mop in data center A looks like a mop in data center B and C. So we've got all standardized templates and formats. And then the team of our facility managers, they have a standing meeting where they review all the new procedures that have been generated, and they are the ones that approve it. So it's kind of a self-regulated organization. The managers, the facility managers, approve the new MOPS. And if there's a question, then it gets bumped up to my engineering team, and then the engineering team will review it and comment on the procedures.
Any other questions?
Can you give us an idea of the size of your organization and any kinds of kind of key organizational decisions that you made that you thought had a real positive impact on your overall operations?
Mm-hmm. I think the struggle of large globally distributed organizations is whether you should try and still centralize a lot of your engineering and design functions, or if you want to decentralize and distribute those out to the sites. So we've taken an approach recently to put more of the engineering and design capability at the sites themselves. And we have a central team that, like I said, most of our designs start with kind of roughly a basis that's roughly 60-ish% done. And then the teams are now responsible for taking that through design completion themselves at the site with the local consultants that we're working on. And really that's a matter of practicality, because if you're trying to work 12 or 15 time zones away from where that data center is being built, there's just not enough overlap in the day, and it just becomes inefficient to have to keep sending things back to Mountain View. So that decentralized model is something that we're finding is working pretty well. The organization as a whole, between design, construction management, engineering, operations, and health and safety and sustainability, that whole team is almost 700.
No other questions? Well, we'll have a couple minutes extra for the break. I appreciate y'all coming out. Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Lee.
See ya.